Hello, and gather round for another tale of Stromalong, the finest sailor that ever came from America's shores. Now, there have been plenty of fine sailors in the world, but none that lived was finer than old Stromalong. He was born from a hurricane, 4 fathoms tall, with a ship, the Tuscarora, so big the sailors needed horses just to get across it. The legendary captain had braved the stormiest seas, had sailed around the world more times than most sailors can count, and had even defeated the legendary Kraken. He ate barnacles for breakfast, largemouth for lunch, cannonballs for dinner, and pirate's best lookout if he ever wanted dessert. Old Stromalong was such a legend that people can't even agree on how he disappeared. Myself, I've heard 3 different stories about how the old salt crossed into the great beyond, each crazier than the last. And I'm going to tell you all 3 right now. The first is the least likely, I think, but you never can rule anything out where old Stromalong is involved. Legend has it that one day, out on the high seas, Stromalong got a powerful hunger on him. You ever have one of those days where you eat, and no matter how much you eat, you never feel quite full? It was one of those days, and let me tell you, they're extra nasty when you're a giant like Stromalong. He ate a stack of flapjacks, each thick as a tire, with a whole mug of syrup, and his stomach was still growling. So he went and got his fishing rod. Always plenty to eat in the ocean if you have the skill to reel it in, especially if you're as big as old Stromalong. Most fishing rods, you've seen them, are about as tall as a person with a little line so thin it almost looks like a spiderweb. Stromalong's fishing rod was the mast from a normal ship, and his fishing line was steel cable as thick as your wrist. He put big hunks of old salt pork on a grappling hook for bait and then cast it a mile into the wavy ocean. Well, set up as he was, old Stromalong couldn't help but catch some big old fish. In less than a minute, he had a bite on his giant rod, the mast bending down towards the water. He whooped with joy and gave it a yank, and out of the water, I kid you not, popped the biggest great white shark you've ever seen.
"Well, you'll make a fine meal," Stromalong laughed. "But let's see if we can't do even better."
He cast his line out again and pulled in another great white shark. Another cast, another shark. After an hour, old Stromalong had 6 of the biggest, meanest sharks you've ever seen piled up on his deck. Legend has it, and no one was around to confirm but the sharks, but legend has it that Stromalong ate all 6 great whites in one fabulous feast. After that, he had so much shark in him that he actually started to grow gills and a tail. He dove into the ocean to breathe, and soon he had turned into the biggest great white shark in all the 7 seas. He's still swimming happily to this day, if you believe that tale, and many do. But some people say that isn't so. They say Stromalong didn't die, but was taken by Davy Jones himself to live as a lord beneath the sea. The way they tell it is Stromalong lasted all through the age of sailing ships and was around when the first of the mighty steamships appeared on the water. The first one came past Stromalong, belching smoke and fire into the air from its engines, and old Stromalong thought the ship was on fire. Well, being a helpful sort of guy, he decided he would put out the fire and save the ship. He pulled his giant ship up next to the steamship and started pouring barrels of water down the shaft into the engine. Soon, the fire was out, and the captain of the smaller ship was standing on the deck, shouting something fierce. "You giant oaf!" he hollered. "What's the big idea putting out our fire? We need that steam to get going."
"Oh, my mistake," said Stromalong. "Where I come from, a ship on fire needs putting out. We use sails and the sea to get around. All that smoke and fire seems a mite unnatural."
"It's a steamship, you big galoot," said the steam captain.
And it's faster than any sail. Even faster than those great big sails you got on that oversized ship of yours."
Old Stormalong threw back his head and laughed, a sound like distant thunder echoing over still water.
"Ho, ho, ho, ho! You think this little thing can outrace me and the Tuscarora?" "I do," said the steam captain. "Me and my crew can leave you in our wake, no doubt about it." "Well, I do have some doubts myself," said Stormalong. "I think me and the wild winds will sail right past your little toy steamboat." "It's a race, then. First one to cross the Atlantic Ocean,"
said the steam captain, and they shook on it, the steam captain's hand swallowed up by Stormalong's massive paw. The next day, they lined up at the shores of Boston and took off. The steamship chugged and belched smoke and broke through the waves. Stormalong waited a moment, unfurled his mighty sails, and his boat seemed to fly before the wind. In no time at all, they had passed the steamboat and were halfway across the Atlantic. But then tragedy struck. In the middle of the ocean, the wind went calm. There was not a single wisp of wind to blow the boat, and the steamship chugged slowly by.
"Ha ha ha! See you in Europe!"
the steam captain called, laughing his head off as he passed. Old Stormalong knew he couldn't let some steamship beat him.
"If the wind doesn't want to blow," he rumbled to himself, standing tall, "then I guess I'll just have to take over the job."
He took in a deep breath, 2 great lungfuls of fresh, salty sea air, and then blew it out as hard as he could. His breath came out like a hurricane, snapping the sails full and sending the ship rocketing across the choppy Atlantic. In a moment, he was flying by the steamship, its captain looking on with a horrified expression.
"That's impossible!"
"Ha!" said Stormalong, pausing between bellowing breaths.
"See you in Europe!"
The race continued back and forth, but by the time the shores of Ireland came into view, it was clear that Stormalong was the winner. The Tuscarora coasted into port a full day ahead of the steamship. All the old sailors cheered, and even old Davy Jones, the lord of all sunken sailors, thought it was the finest bit of sailing he'd ever seen. Legend has it that after one heck of a party to celebrate, Davy Jones actually brought old Stormalong with him into the deep and made him a lord of the seas. Gave him a crown and everything. That's probably the happiest ending, but there's one more, and it's the craziest one of all. It was September, the peak of hurricane season in Florida, and old Stormalong was there, making supply runs and helping out as best as he could. In those days, there were no planes to fly over the storms, so the sailors had to travel under 'em. You ever see the sea in a hurricane? Waves so tall they block out the world in roaring, swelling thunder, the sky dark as night and alive with ripping winds, the salty spray driven in stinging needles. Stormalong and his crew sailed through it all, teeth gritted and eyes wild with adventure. They came upon other, smaller ships that were being smashed apart by the wind and waves. The crew got to work throwing ropes and rafts and hauled all the sinking sailors out of the sea. The hurricanes were so bad, though, it seemed no sooner had they saved one sailor than 2 more were sinking in their place.
"What do we do, Captain?"
asked an old hand who'd been traveling with Stromalong for years.
"We can't save 'em all."
"Like salt we can't," the captain bellowed. "Take the wheel and hold her steady. I'm going to help."
With that, Stormalong dove off his own giant ship and into the raging waters. With his massive hands, he plucked other sailors from a watery grave, but still ships were sinking faster than he could save them.
"Forget this," Stormalong said. "Everyone stay on your ships."
"But they're sinking!" someone shouted over the whipping wind.
"Stay on!"
bellowed Stormalong in a voice that brooked no argument.
And then, hero that he was, Stormalong used his massive muscles to lift entire ships out of the water. He'd scoop them up, broken beams and all, and then put them safely on the sprawling deck of his ship, the Tuscarora. His crew thought he was crazy, but they'd been with him and fought the Kraken, so they were made of sturdy stuff, and up to follow his lead and keep the ship afloat while he worked. As the wind started to blow itself out, Stormalong and his crew made it back to the coast of Florida with nearly 1,000 men they'd rescued. All the sailors got off onto the shore, as even the Tuscarora was in rough shape. Legend has it that Stormalong stayed on board along, waiting to see if he could untangle his massive sails, and that's when it happened. One last gust of wind, the dying breath of the salty hurricanes, ripped through the bay. It caught the sails Stormalong was working on and spread them wide as wings. In an instant, they'd ripped free of the creaking mast and soared into the sky, with Stormalong still hanging on. The giant was carried into the sky, higher and higher, until finally he was lost in the shining clouds. His crew assumed he'd come back down again sometime soon, but he never did. They say Stormalong got his heavenly reward that day, and being a unique sort of man, he had to get there in a unique sort of way. That's the story I believe, if I have to believe any of them. Still, old Stormalong is still out there in spirit. So next time you're near the ocean, have a sip for the old captain, killer of the Kraken, snacker of sharks, stamper of the steamship, and just all around the greatest sailor to ever haul a line. Here's to old Stormalong, wherever he may be. The end.